Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance, and here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. The House this morning passed the second big spending bill, Biden's nearly $2 trillion Build Back Better plan. There's been massive pushback from Republicans who say it'll wreck the economy, but Democrats say this is exactly what America needs to recover. Incoming Virginia Governor Youngkin tells other GOP governors that focusing on education is the key to winning elections. And members of Congress are taking notice to a Marxist ideology being spread to young people in our schools. How to define critical race theory, and more importantly, how do you spot it? During Thursday's press conference, Senate Republicans blamed the Biden administration for expected skyrocketing heating bills this winter. They're also against using pandemic relief funds to subsidize the rising heating costs.
Well, Americans are at this point of the year having to make some tough decisions, hard decisions for American families. It's whether they can afford to pay to eat or whether they can afford to pay to heat. That's what they're facing this winter.
At the press conference, Senate Republicans talked about the expected dramatic increase of heating costs this winter due to soaring energy prices. Lawmakers criticized Democrats using COVID-19 as an excuse to push for the large spending bill, which has caused inflation and rising gas prices.
This is a result of bad policies, really targeting our fossil fuel companies, our oil and gas companies in Texas and elsewhere.
Before the press conference, the White House announced it wants to deploy several $billion from the American Rescue Plan, also known as the Pandemic Relief Bill, to fund high heating costs this winter.
The American Rescue Plan wasn't designed to save the country from the Biden administration. It was designed to save the country from COVID.
Senator Lisa Murkowski gave some suggestions on how to resolve the energy problem, including lowering the hostility against American energy producers. The House this morning narrowly passed Biden's second social welfare spending bill, nearly $2 trillion for social welfare and climate projects. NTD's Melina Wisecup has been tracking this story closely. Melina, how did this vote unfold in the House?
Steve, after long hours on the floor, this bill did just pass along party lines this morning. President Biden did give congressional Democrats a call to congratulate them on the passage of this bill. Now, one Democrat did vote with Republicans in opposition to it. That's Representative Jared Golden from Maine. Golden says he's concerned about the trillions being pumped into the economy through COVID relief as well as these new investments. Golden also says that he's concerned this bill would spend more on helping give tax breaks to the ultra wealthy than it would spend on helping the lower and middle income Americans. Golden is also disputing the argument that the bill is fully paid for. According to the Congressional Budget Office, this bill will add around $360 billion in net deficit to the national debt. Now, of course, the Biden administration says this bill will be fully paid for. He's hoping to generate enough revenue through tax raises and other means of generating revenue to pay it off. Now, Speaker Pelosi also reiterated that this bill will be fully paid for as she praised the bill's passage earlier today. Now, we know that this bill comes right after Biden signing that historic infrastructure investment earlier this week. And if this spending bill does make it to Biden's desk, this adds up to around $3 trillion in the first year of his presidency. And House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy made note of this record spending during his hours-long, record-breaking floor speech last night. Let's listen.
You are spending so much money. Never before. We spent less defeating Hitler, Mussolini, and Japan. What we have before us isn't a social spending bill. It's a pathway to socialism.
And Leader McCarthy did set a new record with that floor speech, 8.5 hours. There was very few members left in the chamber when he did finally wrap up. So, Melina, tell us again, what's in this massive piece of legislation?
Well, Steve, there's so many pieces of this bill that it's hard to break down, but here are some of the key investments. So just under $1 trillion would go towards investing in America's families, and $500 billion is dedicated to moving America towards clean energy. It also permanently bans new offshore oil and gas leasing along the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. And now in the climate area, it plans to raise a bit of money by taxing fossil fuels and waste emissions. And there's nearly $200 billion for housing that includes rental assistance, public housing, etc. $400 billion will go towards health care.
And we know immigration funding was in the original proposal of this bill. Did that make it into the final version?
Immigration is in the final version of this bill, but it won't provide a pathway to citizenship. It will, however, give work permits to undocumented immigrants, to most undocumented immigrants here in the United States, as well as protecting those immigrants from being deported. Steve, I do expect there to be some changes to this House version once the Senate gets the bill, especially when you look at things such as immigration. So the Senate parliamentarian, that's the Senate Rules Advisor, has already rejected two of the Democrats' previous proposals to include immigration reform in this budget bill because she says that immigration doesn't belong, these immigration policies don't belong in a budget bill. So once it gets to the Senate, it will face a long process there before making progress. Steve?
Thanks for that, Melina. And a group of leading Republicans on Wednesday introduced a Parents' Bill of Rights to counter government officials seeking control over school curriculum. GOP members are saying that Democrats have recently started to take power away from parents while handing control to the politicians and teachers' unions to dictate what children should be taught in classrooms. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy introduced the Parents' Bill of Rights on Wednesday and stated that the involvement of parents is critical. The bill includes the right for parents to know what is being taught in public schools and see the reading material and the right to be heard. The legislature would also prohibit public schools from selling student data and would require that parents sign consent forms before schools administer health procedures. Congresswoman Virginia Foxx sits on the House Committee of Education and Labor. The Congresswoman has introduced a bill that will help shed light on the issue of critical race theory, an ideology rooted in Marxist thought that is said to be influencing America's youth. Here's part of our interview with Representative Foxx. Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report. Now, Congresswoman, I want to ask you about a bill that you've introduced with your colleague, Congressman Fitzgerald. It's the CRT Transparency Act. The issue of CRT was a very big issue in the Virginia gubernatorial race. In other parts of the country, is CRT a real thing, and what is it?
Well, you will hear from the bureaucrats that CRT is not a real thing, that it's not really being taught, but what you will find out is concepts from CRT are being infiltrated into the curriculum. And what we want is the parents to know what is being taught in the schools. We don't want them to have a hassle with getting the information on what's being taught in the schools. So we can make the CRT that has raised so many issues in Virginia and other places a non-issue if we promote transparency.
Now, Congresswoman, what would you say to those parents who are skeptical of CRT or may not know even what it is, and how would you, basically advise them to turn over the rock and find the snake, if you will, when it comes to this issue?
Well, what CRT basically does, the CRT, again, that's so controversial, not our bill, is it says to students of color that they are victims. And it tells white students they are oppressors. Well, and that we're stuck as a result of our race. Well, that's simply not true in this country. It might be true other places, but it's certainly not true in this country. I grew up in a house with no electricity and no running water. My mother had a 6th grade education, my father a 9th grade education. We were extraordinarily poor, and yet here I am as a United States representative. That tells you that there is opportunity for everyone. Look at Senator Tim Scott. He was here in the House of Representatives, a great friend. Senator Scott grew up very, very poor. His race does not define him. He's not a victim.
Now, Congresswoman, you've been working with some of your other colleagues, for instance, Congressman Jim Jordan, calling to release the discussions between the Department of Education and the National School Board Association. Why is that? What do you expect that those discussions might reveal?
Well, again, we want transparency. I tell people all the time, what we do here in Congress is basically open to everybody. You see how we vote, you hear our discussions, you hear our debate. Well, that should be for all branches of government. That certainly should be for the executive branch. So we believe, and in fact, a whistleblower has told us that there has been collusion among the White House, the FBI, the Department of Education, and the Department of Justice to label parents who have come to school boards to ask questions and to demand accountability and transparency as domestic terrorists. That is wrong. It's absolutely wrong. We cannot tolerate that. School boards are elected officials. Parents have the right to ask what they are doing and what is happening behind the scenes. And for any branch of our government to demean parents' rights to have information and to speak up is wrong. And we do not want to see that continue.
Now, Congresswoman, just switching gears a little bit here, there's a term that a lot of Americans will probably hear a lot about in the future, and that's school choice. Tell us about what is school choice and why is it important?
I think about the only good thing that came about through COVID is that the veil was pulled back about the control of the unions for the government control schools, or union control, some people would say, and also the curriculum. And so it's been a positive thing that parents have become aware of what's happening in the government control schools, and more are looking for alternatives.
Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your coming and talking and helping inform the American people. That's what we're trying to do through the Education Committee.
Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves called upon the state legislature to ban critical race theory in taxpayer-funded classrooms. The governor complained that the elite power seekers wanting to be seen as saviors use race in an attempt to divide, humiliate, and indoctrinate our children. Incoming Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin said his victory in Virginia showed a winning path for the GOP. During a National Governors Association meeting, Youngkin stressed that Republicans can win by pushing for strong schools without a watered-down curriculum and advocating for parental rights. The Department of Justice is giving $139 million to police departments across the country as part of a program to hire over 1,000 new police officers. The funds will go to more than 100 police departments across the country. The money is designed to help police reduce crime and support community-oriented policing programs. Attorney General Merrick Garland said in a statement, "We are committed to providing police departments with the resources needed to help ensure community safety and build community trust." And coming up, 3 sisters from Virginia fled religious persecution in communist China. Find out how their stories led to cities and counties in Virginia passing legislation against forced live organ harvesting at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. It is no secret that the Chinese Communist Party poses a threat to the civilized world. There's one United States senator that is calling for a total boycott of the 2022 Beijing Olympics. We also sit down with United States congressmen to assess the growing threat of the CCP. Bad news for Democrats. National polls show former President Donald Trump trending up as President Biden inches to near historic low approval ratings. And another House Democratic lawmaker announced that he will not be seeking re-election. Boston Celtics star Enes Kanter slammed Beijing for its widespread killing of prisoners of conscience for their organs. "Stop murdering for organs. It's a crime against humanity." This is what the NBA player wrote in a post that appeared on his social media accounts. Kanter's posts include photos of a new pair of customized sneakers conveying the same message. On the side of his shoe read a slogan in bold letters painted, "Stop organ harvesting in China." 3 Virginia residents fled persecution in communist China. Their stories help to shed light on the brutal persecution against the spiritual discipline Falun Dafa. So much so that many counties and cities throughout the state of Virginia passed legislation condemning the CCP's forced live organ harvesting against Falun Dafa practitioners. Here's a look at the story.
Virginia resident Chunyang Wang nearly died in a Chinese prison. Her 2 sisters were sent to labor camps, her daughter forced to flee China. The family persecuted simply because they do the Falun Dafa spiritual practice.
My husband died from the persecution. I'm family broken. The business lost.
Chunyang's health deteriorated during a 5-year prison sentence. Once she'd been tortured so badly that she lost consciousness 3 times in a row. Many Chinese victims, like Chunyang, claim that the Chinese government is killing prisoners of conscience to sell their organs. This year, 23 Virginia localities passed resolutions warning residents about the risks of travel to China for an organ transplant.
Resolution condemning organ harvesting from people of conscience in the People's Republic of China.
According to human rights advocate David Kilgore, these transplants are often carried out secretly in what he describes as a mafia of medicine.
One man I heard about recently was being practically taken into the operating room after paying, I forget how much it was a lot of money he paid for his organ, and somebody said to him, "We need another $10,000.
In 2020, Virginia delegate David Bulova sent a sign-on letter to the Secretary of State urging action to help bring these atrocities to an end.
I think it's a terrible tragedy, and it's something that really gets to the core of humanity.
Bulova would like to see more efforts at the federal level.
You don't want to ever make it look like you're backing off or that you are letting this become normal, because it's not.
Chunyang's sister, Chunying, talks about being held down by 9 guards to take her blood. A trained nurse herself, she suspected they were testing for organ compatibility. The family is now reunited in Fairfax County, but 19 of Chunyang's friends and family members all died.
Our next guest is Member of Congress Representative Dan Newhouse of Washington State. Congressman Dan Newhouse, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you, Steve. Pleasure to be with you.
The Chinese Communist Party has been coming at us as a country from many different angles. One angle you saw very clearly that a lot of people don't think about when they think of the CCP, and that's our agriculture. You introduced an amendment to an appropriations bill. Tell us a little bit about that and what it was aiming to do.
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up. So one of the concerns that we have, and China certainly is at the center of this, is foreign ownership of many of our agricultural assets. China has, over the last 10 years, dramatically increased the assets that they've been purchasing in the United States, particularly as I focused on related to agricultural production. We see them doing the same thing in other countries around the globe, increasing the assets that they own in all kinds of areas of manufacturing, of resources, of agricultural production, lots of things. So because of that trend, and because China, frankly, is an adversary, we want to make sure that we control our food supply. I think it's a natural, important national security issue. And so this amendment that you referred to, that I was able to get attached to an appropriations bill, prohibits the government, the communist government of China, from purchasing agricultural assets in the United States.
Now, Congressman, on the issue of the CCP, there's another bill that you had introduced called the Stop Organ Harvesting Act. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that the Chinese Communist Party has been involved in state-run forced organ harvesting against political and religious dissidents, specifically against Falun Gong practitioners. If this is true, which the evidence does suggest, how should world governments and world leaders be dealing with the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, I think that's, you can't have it both ways. You're either going to stand for human rights or you're not. And I think that American companies in particular need to lead the way in making sure that we stand up for human rights that are so basic and so important. And so I would encourage them to take those strong positions.
Now, Congressman, you touched upon it. There's companies like the NBA who have players, specifically Enes Kanter, who's raising awareness about the ongoing human rights issues in China, specifically organ harvesting. He had the topic painted on his sneakers, drawing attention. What do you make of this?
Oh, I absolutely do. And I think it's a tremendous thing that this young man has done, standing up for something so important. We should encourage that because we as a country also stand for those same values, and the NBA should as well.
Congressman Newhouse, thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
President Biden said Thursday he is considering a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics, meaning Biden and other government officials would not attend, a move Congress members from both parties seem to be supporting. And Senator Tom Cotton says U.S. athletes should boycott too. NTD's Melina Wisecup reports. Cotton lists a number of crimes against humanity committed by the Chinese Communist Party, such as persecuting religious and ethnic minorities, using them for slave labor, and subjecting ethnic minority women to rape for ethnic cleansing.
They harvest organs from dissidents and ethnic and religious minorities.
Really crucial issue, particularly with Falun Gong practitioners in China. I know there's been some resolution here in Congress to help this issue, to condemn the issue. Why do you think that it hasn't moved forward, and what can the U.S. do to help this move forward?
Well, unfortunately, you have a lot of panda huggers in Congress who don't want to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party and who are carrying water for the Biden administration, who care more about things like getting Xi Jinping to make some fantastical promise about carbon emissions 30 years in the future, prioritizing these areas of what they perceive as needed cooperation with the Chinese communists, as opposed to standing up to a nation committing genocide against its own people.
Although Biden has only said he's considering the boycott, Senator Cotton tells us he expects the administration will follow through because it's the only decision that is morally just. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has supported a diplomatic boycott, saying silence on this issue is unacceptable. It enables China's abuses. Cotton is calling for an even stronger action against the regime. He says a diplomatic boycott is the bare minimum and that a full boycott is needed, meaning even U.S. athletes should not attend. Senator Marco Rubio is placing a hold on Biden's pick for ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns. In an interview with Fox News' Maria Bartiromo, Rubio explained why.
I would tell you that it's not that he's an evil or a bad person. The problem is he is part of this failed bipartisan consensus that thought China was going to get rich and then they become like us.
In a statement, Rubio said that Nicholas Burns has a long career in public service, but it is a career defined by the failure to understand the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party. Burns used to serve at the State Department under the Clinton and Bush administrations. He took a tough line on dealings with China at his Senate confirmation hearing, saying genocide in Xinjiang, abuses in Tibet, and bullying of Taiwan must stop. But Rubio feels that is not enough.
And what we need right now are people that clearly understand that what China is a geopolitical competitor and a potential adversary. They seek to overtake us.
Poll results favoring a 2024 White House bid by former President Trump seem positive, while results for President Biden are sliding down. The Marquette Law School released a poll Thursday of about 1,000 adults nationwide that showed 60% of Republicans want the former president to run again in 2024, while most independents and Democrats do not. Recent polls also show that Trump retains favor with voters in red states like Iowa, where the Des Moines Register had a poll of 810 Iowans showing that 51% favor the former president, while 40% prefer President Biden. Other polls also show President Biden's approval trending well below 50% to as low as 36%. Polls revealed concerns over Biden's handling of the pandemic, honesty, and leadership skills. House Democrat Congressman George Butterfield announced Thursday that he will not be seeking re-election. The announcement comes as another setback to Democrats trying to hold on to a House majority in the 2022 midterms.
I have made the difficult decision that I will not seek re-election to the United States House of Representatives.
Butterfield is 74 years old and served as head of the Congressional Black Caucus. He represented several rural counties in northeastern North Carolina since 2004, often winning by comfortable margins due to support by black voters. But recent redistricting of the state will likely place him in a toss-up district with a smaller share of African Americans. Kansas Governor Laura Kelly, a Democrat, expressed her opposition to the federally imposed vaccine mandate for private businesses. The governor said in a tweet that OSHA made the right decision in temporarily pausing businesses with over 100 employees to have to require the COVID-19 vaccine. She said that states have been leading the fight against COVID-19, and it's too late to impose a federal standard. The battle over the federal mandate is with the U.S. Court of Appeals, but legal experts are certain it is heading for the Supreme Court. And that's all we have for you on the Capitol Report today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.